We will talk a bit about how the cluster analysis is carried out, what does it mean, how you can assess industry clusters, and then a bit more detail on location quotient analysis. And then today we are going to share with you two mapping websites. These are two different mapping websites. Both are focused on industry cluster. One, you have already been working on the tools, and they have data related to employment, but the other one is solely focused on location quotient analysis. And then we will share some information on the exercises and then question and answer session. So just a bit of review. Last webinar, we were more focused on what was industry cluster, means what are they, how can you define them, how can you identify them, what are the 3 or 4 basic economic variables that you can use to assess industry cluster, who all are using industry cluster based strategies. Now today, the focus will be more on the applied side of the industry cluster. So if you are planning to have an economic development approach or a strategy which are based on industry cluster, the first step is to identify the clusters present in your region's economy. So within your region, what are the industry clusters that are present? And when you know those, you also need to know what are the geographic locations of the industries which are part of your cluster. So where within the geography of your region, where are those groupings of industries located? And then the next aspect is analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of your cluster. And in this, location quotient is a useful method because you can assess what is the current location quotient and what have been the changes over the time. So when we say here region, it means a group of counties. And when you identify that an industry cluster is competitive in your region, it does not mean it is present in equity or it is present everywhere in your region. There are locations or group of counties within your region where the industry cluster will be concentrated. And that's where the variables like location quotient becomes useful, because location quotient can help you identify the specific geographic areas within your region where the actual concentration is. So a framework for a cluster analysis is how can you maintain or increase the competitive strength? And many people, they go for the strategic targeting. And one example is education and workforce training. So for example, Indiana has now renewable energy cluster, especially the wind turbines and wind farms, which are in quite a few counties. And then one skill need is the engineers or wind turbine technicians. And for example, Ivy Tech has some courses which are focused on that. So that's the skills gap strategy that they are focusing on. So if you know that your cluster has a need for a specific skill or need for a specific education program, you can target it that way. Then there are some strategies to accelerate the cluster. In this case, our center, Purdue Center for Regional Development, also has a specific strategic doing program which focuses on how can you accelerate the cluster once you have identified it. But it is a lot about facilitating your private sector and public sector. So it's a lot about community and regional engagement. Now you can also focus on building new cluster strength in your area, and one specific area is those emerging clusters, and we will talk about that in detail in the next slides. So if you know what are your emerging cluster, these have the potential to grow further, and these clusters can be strengthened. So the industry cluster variables, just for review, based on the last webinar, the 4 important and useful variables are employment by place of work. Again, just to recap, employment can be of 2 types, place of work or place of residence. You need to focus on place of work employment. You also need to know what are the establishments, and then again there is a difference between establishments and firms. And for establishments, there are several data sets available. From the public side, you can use county business patterns, or you can also use NETs, what is known as National Establishment Time Series databases, from Edward Lowe Foundation and Dun and Bradstreet. So you need to know your establishments, where actual businesses are happening, and which are those businesses which are part of a specific cluster. Average earnings is always useful data, so you can compare cluster to cluster. And then location quotient based on employment. Location quotient can also be based on establishments and earnings, but the most useful or highly used measure is location quotient based on employment. And the definition here is given by Bureau of Labor Statistics, but as we have talked last time, it is basically a ratio. It is a ratio compared to the national average. So how better or worse your region is compared to the national average. So location quotient has the capacity to show specialization for the region. Now this location quotient can be calculated for a cluster, and then further one step deep, you can go and calculate it for the industry sectors. And as we had mentioned earlier, a 1.3 LQ means 30% more concentrated than the nation. So in our mapping website and in our research, we had identified a minimum LQ of 1.2, but in other academic research, such as by Professor Ed Fazer and Professor Bergman, they had recommended an LQ of 1.25 or higher. But in practice, if you use an LQ of 1.2, it is good. You can see the formula here. LQ is simply a ratio, and then it's a ratio of regional employment in industry cluster to total regional employment divided by the national ratio. And when you calculate the location quotient for sectors, it can be very informative. So you have calculated location quotient for your cluster, and you know the cluster is specialized. And when you assess LQ for industry sectors within those clusters, you will know what are those industry sectors which are driving your industry cluster. So for example, Hawaii has a very strong tourism cluster. So there is one specific sector which is scenic and sightseeing transportation. It had an LQ of almost 29 in 2006. So the concentration of scenic transportation services in Hawaii was 29 times higher than national average. And it's not a surprise, Hawaii is a major tourism place. But then you also need to see the average earnings in those cluster and sector. Usually service-based employment, they are not high-paying jobs. So you need to compare more than one variable. You need to have a suite of variables, economic variables, and through which you can understand how your clusters are performing, and then you can also understand how industry sectors are performing within that cluster. So here, Lee Llewellyn has an audio file here, and which I will be running now, and where he shares his experience about using in location quotient in practice.
You know, as an economic development consultant, I'm always looking for simple ways to explain and to communicate to stakeholders in the community what's really happening and what are the assets that they have that they can use to build upon. And location quotient really becomes a really fairly simple and straightforward tool for explaining to community stakeholders and to leaders what their industry base is and what they have to build on. Because it's a fairly simple and straightforward number, one being parity with a national average, people can understand that as that number then rises beyond 1 and as it approaches 2 or higher, they can understand that as a fairly simple ratio. And even though it's a fairly complex calculation that goes into producing that number as a communication tool, as a way of helping a community understand what are the industries, what are the clusters that are driving their economy, where do they have a competitive advantage in terms of the clustering of specific industries. Location quotient is a really powerful tool for doing that. That doesn't always mean that communities will look at that and look at what they have and see that as the right asset or as an advantage. There's always the case where communities want to be something that they're not. They want to be something they have no capacity to be. But at least, again, as a consultant, if you can present them with a location quotient and say, well, here's what you have, here's what you don't have, here's where you don't have a competitive advantage, and here's where you do. Obviously, it's up to them to decide whether or not they want to actually act on the reality that you've presented to them. But location quotient is a really, really powerful tool for communicating, simply because, at least as it's presented and on the surface, it appears to be fairly simple and straightforward.
Okay, thank you, Lee. So in this slide, what you see are 4 classifications or 4 possibilities based on industry cluster location quotient. So LQ can tell you whether your industry cluster has the capacity to export. So the first category is you have exporting industry clusters and they also are increasing in their LQ. So that's one bucket or one set of industry cluster. The second is you have industry clusters but LQs are decreasing, and you are assessing this over a time period, say 5 years or 10 years, long range or a medium range time period. And the third category is you have industry clusters that are not exporting but LQs are increasing. So over the years they are gradually increasing their specialization or their export potential. And the fourth category is there are industry clusters which are not exporting and also their LQs are decreasing. So this is a way to classify your clusters into 4 different buckets, and this you can visualize through a bubble chart. So here is an example of a bubble chart, and it is based on 10 years of data from 2002 to 2012, and this is a part of southern Indiana. The map shows a group of counties, 10 or 12 counties, for which we have prepared industry cluster analysis. So the first quadrant, where we say stars, so this quadrant has the industry cluster which are exporting. The LQ is more than 1.2 or more than 1. Now in the Excel spreadsheet you can develop an axis through 1.0, but here when you prepare your bubble chart, you also give the actual location quotient value. So manufacturing supercluster has a LQ of 3.4 or almost 3.5 times much more than national average, the concentration. So this bubble chart, the size of the bubble shows the employment size. So for manufacturing cluster, the employment is 30,000 plus jobs. So all the clusters which are in this quadrant, they are exporting or they are likely to export. They have export potential, but then they also have grown their location quotient. So these are your star cluster. In the second quadrant here, when we call it mature, for example, the mining, this cluster, the LQ is more than 1.0, which is theoretical cutoff, or 1.2, but then the LQ has been decreasing. So it is in the negative side, so it is not growing. So these are almost your matured or stagnant industry clusters. The quadrant here, which is one below the star quadrant, the emerging quadrant is an important one. So here the clusters, their location quotient currently in 2012 is less than 1. So theoretically they don't have export potential, but their LQ, it has been increasing. And this is an important part. So these are the emerging industry cluster which you can target, which you can push, which you can develop some policies and strategies to grow. So IT. So for example, IT and telecommunication has the potential. It has been increasing its LQ, but it has not reached the 1.2 level yet. And then the fourth quadrant here, which is transforming, it is basically, these are clusters which don't have the export potential, which are not exporting. The LQ is less than 1, but they are also decreasing. Of course, this is a 10-year long range analysis. You can also do it for a smaller range also. And for example, pre-recession period and post-recession period, as you know that between 2008, 2009, a lot of jobs were lost and it has affected the cluster. So how the cluster performed before the recession and what is the situation from 2010 and onwards will be a good analysis. Now these are the bubble charts for the 17 main cluster. And as we had explained earlier, that manufacturing supercluster is such a large cluster by itself that we have to divide it into 6 subcluster. And that is a good way. So if you prepare a separate chart for manufacturing subclusters, you can see that this region has very high LQ in machinery as well as quite a few jobs. Similarly, in transportation equipment manufacturing and primary metal also. And especially talking about transportation equipment, this is one subcluster where Indiana, several regions of Indiana, they are highly specialized. As we had mentioned earlier, agribusiness, biomed, transportation logistics, and transportation equipment manufacturing, these are relatively strong clusters for Indiana. And there is specialization in primary metal manufacturing also, but this particular subcluster is very strong towards Lake County, the northwestern side of Indiana. The fabricated metal product for this region is in the matured category, and electrical equipment, as you can see, it has very small number of jobs, just 190 jobs, and then it's transforming, it's basically declining. So the bubble chart gives you a way to classify and assess your cluster, and you should always prepare this for your region. So through this you can start developing your regional strategies. This particular slide is just a representation of the bubble chart you saw in the last two slides, and all you are doing is you are showing those clusters which are present in those four quadrants. And as we had explained, the x-axis here, the horizontal axis, is growth in specialization. So that is the growth or decrease in location quotient over the time period. And the y-axis or vertical axis is magnitude of specialization. So it is just a simple representation of that bubble chart. And many people, if they have difficulty in visualizing the bubble chart, a simpler representation can be helpful. This particular region has quite a few clusters which are stars. So forestry and wood products, not surprise. Chemicals, it is a good cluster. It's a high paying cluster. Transportation equipment we have already mentioned, so as advanced materials. Now bear in mind that our cluster definition, some of the industry sectors here, they overlap. So from the cluster, once you start doing analysis for industry sectors, you can also identify which are those particular industry sector which are driving these clusters. Those industry sectors will have high LQ, and they are growing over the longer time period, and they are the main hub for these industry cluster, and we call them as driver industries or core industries. Quite a few are in the emerging quadrant also, and so as matured and transforming quadrant. So you have a suite of strategies as an in your economic development toolbox. It can be business retention and expansion. So maybe the transforming quadrant, you can apply those there, or you can do further analysis for specific gaps on labor skills if they are needed, or gaps in supply and value chain. So economic leakage analysis is the next step. So how you can close those gaps, and then maybe some lack of infrastructure. So this is where the cluster engagement or strategic doing process comes into place, where you start identifying the strengths and weaknesses and strategies, how you can accelerate those clusters. So there are strategies which we say, like, we can grow the cluster. We focus on accelerating the cluster. You need to accelerate your emerging cluster. You need to push your stars cluster. You need to save your transforming cluster. So these charts are just ways of helping you visualizing and analyzing your industry clusters. Now, we already talked about the value of employment, and we had shown you an employment map which is available through our mapping website. And what it does is it shows you a cross section or distribution of employment. However, there is a need for normalization, because a larger county will always have a larger concentration of employment, and that is where you can use location quotient, and that's the way you can easily compare county to county. So a small county versus a larger county. And then here is an example of earnings per worker. This is also a very important indicator. So for example, the manufacturing supercluster for this region was star. So all the stars are marked in orange shade. And then it is also high paying, but the highest paying is the machinery subcluster. So this helps you to see how the average earning or average wages by cluster are changing in your region. So the star clusters with very high average wage, they are good to look at, they are useful. Usually what we have seen, that primary metal manufacturing and chemical, they are paying very high wages in several of the regions in Indiana. So now we will start the interactive mapping training for the websites, and I will ask my colleague Andre to join in.
Good morning, everyone. And I would like to start with, again, let me know if the voice is too quiet. I'll adjust my microphone, but we've got actually a new mic this time, so it should be louder. So I'd like to start with overview of our previous webinar. And last time we visited Industry Cluster website, and we'll do this time we'll use again the same website. I showed how to use drawing tool to outline your region. Also, we used custom region summary tool to summarize industry clusters, employment in industry clusters for custom region. And we also used the data query and search tool. So right now, these tools, the tutorials for these tools available on our website, and second exercise for you is ready to download from that web page as a PDF file. And we're asking to complete this exercise and also exercise for this webinar by the mid-June. Again, you can find it on our web page now. Video tutorials available too. So in today's webinar, we'll look at the industry clusters location quotient maps by county first, and this is again the same website that you were looking last time. And you will see how to look at temporal actual information about industry clusters. Also, Indranil will demonstrate location quotient maps as a point maps, and also tools for finding location quotient for custom area or corridor. So with this, let me switch to the actual website. And this is again, this is the website that we used last time. And if you look at the our layer list, this time we're going to use industry clusters LQ layer. So we need to check that box to make it available. And also, let me show you the legend for this map. And actually, this legend will be the same for all layers. It has the same meaning. So all counties that have LQ below 1.2 are marked as gray, in gray color. Above 1.2 but below 2, it's gold color, and everything that's above in darker colors. So basically, everything that's above 5 is in brown color, and it means a very high concentration of that industry in a particular county, or very high specialization. So let's look at a few, at several clusters just to see what kind of pattern you can see on a national map. Let's first look at agribusiness and food processing cluster. And you can clearly see that the concentration is high in Great Plains, which makes sense for me. That means these counties are highly specialized in producing agricultural production or food processing. Now, contrasting that, let's look at, say, energy cluster, and see where the concentration of this industry is in the country. And you can see Texas. Yeah, Texas is part of Texas is highly specialized in that, which probably relates to oil industry. Next, let's look at, let's see what I wanted, primary metal manufacturing. This is also an interesting map. And here also I want to point that those areas of map that have like a holes or not having any counties means there is no industry or no data for that area. So basically, no industries related to this cluster in this area. But what's interesting, if you look at Indiana, you could see Northern Indiana has traditionally really strong cluster in this area, really strong industries. One more cluster is transportation equipment manufacturing. That also displays pretty distinctive spatial pattern. And you can see Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana, Northern Indiana, is kind of area with strong strong groupings of these industries. Now let's zoom in closer to the Indiana state, and let's look at the individual counties and temporal trend. So if I click on any individual counties, just left click while you're in panning mode on the map, and you could see the temporal trend. And we've seen this chart in our first webinar, so I just want to revisit that for LQ values. So you can actually watch how LQ values change through time, and for industry clusters, it's going to be last 3 years. Well, not last, but from 2008 to 2010. So let's look at something else in the southern Indiana. Yeah, just a little decline in the value. Montgomery County declined, but it started to pick up again in 2010. So this way you can analyze the temporal trend in your cluster. Now let's look at another tool. Let me scroll down, and this is the tool that also deals with temporal aspect. So here at the bottom you can see industry clusters temporal change layer. So let's turn off industry clusters LQ layer and turn off jobs and turn on LQs instead in temporal change map. Okay, I need to first check my layer name and then expand LQs, and yeah, something's going on. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, now it's working. So first you need to check any layer in your list. Well, let's look at forest and wood products LQ. And so once you check that, you need to wait just a little bit because it loads actually a series of maps instead of one map. So here at the top, we have a tool called Cluster Time Machine. And once you click that, again, you will need to wait for a few seconds while it's loading data. So I'm switching to industry clusters, and my forest and wood products LQ map is on in my layer list. So now I can click on play button in my tool, and this will launch the slideshow basically of those maps through time. So you can now observe a change from 2008, 2009, and 2010. It's only 3 years, but it could be helpful in analyzing temporal trend of your cluster. All right, now we will switch to another website where Indranil and Adeline will demonstrate you tools to again look into LQ values. So I'm passing now word to Indranil.
Thank you, Andre. A location quotient is such an indicator that you can use it to do some point pattern analysis also. So in the audience, if you are familiar with GIS, you might know about spatial statistics and point pattern analysis. So here we have developed a separate website for location quotient, and we will be sharing this link with you and also giving the link in the main RDM website. So here in the map, what you see are all those counties which as a dot, which has an LQ of 1.2 or higher. And let me open the layer list. And these are advanced material LQs. and let me open the legend. So all these dots, wherever it is location quotient greater or equal to 1.2, now you are visualizing as a point pattern. And this can be useful if you want to study a larger region, means how the specialization is occurring and how it is different from, say, advanced material to transportation and logistics. So let's give a few seconds, and here it is. So you might see that advanced material is highly concentrated in the Midwestern region, but transportation logistics is spread out. And it is even spread out along the border counties wherever there is border crossing. And of course, there is a pattern along the NAFTA corridor. So transportation logistics is such a cluster where several of the states, there are many counties which are specialized. And because it is a cluster which sort of exists, means it is important for every other cluster, means it's a basic ingredient. So this kind of point pattern, if you are trying to study your region in the context of Midwest or other larger region, you can analyze the patterns here. Now the way we have developed this website is if you start zooming in. So suppose if I zoom in for Indiana, and let's give a few seconds. And then these point pattern, they change. So let me change the base map to a darker color. And now what you see are these dots. They are divided into several bubbles, and they are showing different range. So an orange color dot is basically an LQ of 2.6 to 5.0. So now that the whole point pattern has been changed to give you a different representation. Now you see different magnitude, and these are scale dependent. So if you zoom in further, so let me zoom in here, and they will change again. So let me just close and open the advanced material. And if you go to the layer list, the way we have divided is there is a point data set for location quotient, and then below that there is a percent change map by polygon as well. So now you can see your point data, LQ data for 2010, and then in the background is the percent change from 2008 to 2010. So any county which is blue colored, and this is for advanced material, you can see from the legend, is essentially decreasing. It has decreased in those 3 years, but not surprised, because these were some effects on recession, and any cluster related with manufacturing took a hit. So for example, Howard County definitely lost, but then is still, the LQ is still strong. It is between 2.6 and 5.0. So here we wanted to demonstrate you a tool. If you go on the layer list and open the National Highway Planning Network layer. Now this is a public data set, and this is from Bureau of Transportation Statistics. So this data is uploaded. It's part of our ArcGIS server, and when you click on this layer, you are at certain zoom level. You can see all the labels. Now what we have developed are some specific tools for the corridor. As you know, the corridor is a very important regional strategy. So there are studies going on, say for I-70 corridor, which has like feasibility studies for dedicated freight lanes. So it will be good to know that along that corridor, the counties which are present, what kind of strengths they have in a specific cluster, which might use that asset. Similarly, there is an initiative emerging for I-69 corridor. As you know, that I-69 interstate, when it will get built, it will become an important part of the NAFTA corridor, the whole NAFTA network, and lots of goods moving north, and vice versa. So I-69, there is an innovation initiative emerging, and by using this tool, you can calculate the cluster strength for the corridor. So let's see the tool is known as Corridor LQ Calculator, and so if you click on that, it is showing you how to capture the corridor. So let me zoom in a little bit so that I can see better, and maybe I can close. You can close the percent change map and open another base map, but I think here I can see better. So if I click on it and maybe just follow the I-70 corridor, just keep following. So any county that you are intersecting, it will start calculating the regional location quotient. Now, as I have given the command, it is going to our server, it is aggregating those counties and calculating the location quotient. So yeah, it may take few seconds depending on your internet speed, but it should give the results. Now, one advantage of this calculation is you can either add a county or delete a county and see it has calculated. And let me zoom out a little bit. So what now you see is the location quotient, aggregated location quotient for those 3 counties. And by the way, we are working to decrease these decimal points. The tools, they are based on ESRI model builder, which is working on the ArcGIS server, and it's Python, numerical Python. So it is very sophisticated. It can really calculate up to the engineering specification, but we only need decimal spaces up till 2. But let's look at this specific corridor and see primary metal manufacturing. It's almost 4.4 LQ. And then transportation equipment manufacturing, 2.6 LQ. So some of these cluster, they can use bulk goods movement. So when the asset gets built, the dedicated freight corridor, as we know that I-70 carries a lot of agri products across the state of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois. But then these are some of the cluster which can benefit from the corridor. So these kinds of analysis help you engage your region and give you a snapshot. And you can also compare corridor to corridor. So for example, I-70 corridor, and you can extend this, means you zoom out. So as long as your drawing tool, it intersects the county, the tool will calculate. It can be 10 county or 20 county, as many county. There is no limit here. So you can see how the I-69 is fared compared to northern part of I-69 or US 31. US 31 is now expanding, means almost the project is almost ready. So how it can benefit, what are the clusters along the corridor. So this particular tool we have developed, this tool is actually, the reason we have given the buffer distance is because for the demographic website, which we will be covering in later webinar, this tool based on the buffer distance can go and start aggregating census tract, census block groups. So once we developed and designed the tool, so if it intersects, it can be county, but it also works on zip code, census tract, census block, and that's why you see the buffer distance. In this case, the buffer distance does not matter. As long as it intersects the county, it will give you the calculation. So this is a good strategy. So for example, do you need to add 1 or 2 county extra along the corridor and see where your regional specializations are? So this is a way to look within the corridors of your region. Now I will ask Adeline to show another tool which is based on area of interest. So last time Andre showed you the tool area of interest analysis based on employment numbers. This will be based on location quotient. So Adeline here.
Alright, hello. I'm going to be showing you how to use the Area of Interest LQ calculator. So I'm just going to close out of this tool. And what you'll need to do first is zoom to your area of interest. So I'm going to use the 7-county region up in the northwestern corner of Indiana for my area of interest. And what you do first is you open the Area of Interest LQ calculator in the top toolbar. And in this pop-up box, you can see that it provides you with different shape icons that you can use to draw your area of interest onto the map. So look at your area of interest and then choose a shape that represents that area well. So I'm going to use a rectangle. You click on that icon and then come over to the map and draw, or click down and hold and drag your area of interest onto the map. And then let go. And as you can see, I'm not including the entire counties within this shape. As long as the shape includes a portion of the county, this tool will work. So once you've drawn your shape, click Submit. And as you can see, this tool works similarly to the corridor tool that you just saw, but you can use different shapes. Alright, so I'm going to expand this. And every county in your area of interest is now highlighted on the map. And if you look over here, there's a list of every industry cluster. And next to those industry clusters is the LQ values that correspond to your area of interest. So it's calculated them all together as one region instead of separately viewing each county. So this tool is really helpful when you're dealing with a region that's larger than a county, which you probably will be often. And so once you're done viewing those results, you come down to the bottom right corner and click Clear. And then you're ready to draw a new area of interest.
Thank you, Adeline. Now, we will be sharing this website for you, and this mapping website is solely focusing on specialization tools. In addition to those model builder tools, we have some simpler tools such as bar chart. So suppose I select a few counties, and then for those counties I can get the bar chart for LQ. And if you bring your mouse, hover your mouse, you can see those counties also. So that way you can basically see all your 23 industry clusters for your region. So county by county you can assess. But as said, our model builder tools, they are operating at regional level, and it is always recommended that you advance your cluster strategies based on your region. It can be corridor, it can be group of counties, it can cross the state, it can also be metropolitan area. So the LQ bar chart at least gives you a representation of how different counties are. And then there is another temporal LQ bar chart, and if you click here, and then it selects industry cluster location quotient, the change aspect, and then you select a group of industries, you select a group of counties, and then you can see for those specific cluster whether it has changed. So these are percent change from 2008 to 2010. You bring your mouse and you can see different counties, specific counties. So these are just ways to represent and capture your data. So apparel and textile, what's going on there, which has increased, or if it has decreased. In some counties it can increase, in some counties it has decreased, but maybe combined the region is still specialized. So these are the kind of insights you need to get, you need to develop, and then share with your commission, share with your planning commission, your stakeholders. There is another tool here known as upload shapefile, and this tool basically can help you bring, if you can bring your specific geography on this website. So if you upload your own specific area, it will not come to our server, but this tool is much more useful, say for land use and land cover analysis, or maybe specific area transportation assets that you want to look at, and we have developed mapping websites for those, and we will be sharing those later. So the upload shapefile is, suppose you have a specific geography that you don't want to be for public viewing. If you use this tool, you can bring that geography here and then use our tool to analyze based on those geography, and that way your geography will not come to our server. So whenever you click a tool, it is basically communicating with our server, but upload shapefile, you can have your own set of data and then try to study or analyze your data with respect to the background tools and data that we have provided here. So the industry cluster specialization, this website, we have subdivided it into two groups because for each cluster, and let me show the legend. As you have seen, for each cluster, the point pattern map has actually four different categories. And that's why the number of, and they are based on scale, they are scale dependent, and because the number of layers had increased, we had to divide it into two groupings. And then there is industry cluster, which are mostly service, but they have some manufacturing aspects also. And then there is agribusiness, art services, apparel, textile, business and finances, education, energy. So all these service type of cluster, they are located here. Agribusiness, we have located it here, but I should tell you, agribusiness also has manufacturing aspect. So each cluster has four different sub-layer, plus there are polygon layers for percent change. So you need to spend some time with these websites and see what all layers are available and how you can use them, what kind of information they provide. The National Highway Planning Network or the interstate layer, we always recommend that you open those tools before you use the corridor tool. So corridor tool is designed to work capturing that data. And the reason we provided NHPN or National Highway Planning Network is because you can see there are all state routes and US routes, everything is there. So if you want to assess a smaller corridor other than an interstate, this tool will operate. And as you know, NHPN is 400,000 mile network for the United States. So one advantage of these tools is they can work for any region in the country. Means we are focusing on Indiana, so if you want to extend to Illinois or Ohio and see how the corridors or area of interest tools, means what kind of snapshot they are giving, these tools will work also. Now the reason for developing these tools are, there are two ways to approach cluster studies. One is you have a predefined region, and then you are trying to assess the cluster, the strengths and weaknesses based on change in LQ and based on degree or magnitude of LQ or based on employment change. But then the other way is maybe to delineate the region based on a specific cluster. So you can have a cluster-based initiative such as biomedical, and then that cluster based on the specialized county can have its own region where that initiative will operate. So the biomedical and biotechnical initiatives in central Indiana, it has its own region, and that's where the point data set becomes helpful. So that those data sets can help you identify what are those groupings of counties. And then the last layer I want to talk about is the advanced material And this layer is available for every cluster, and these are point data set between location quotient 1 and 1.2. So we know that 1.2 we have used as a cutoff point, but many times communities may need to know if they are 1 or higher. So this layer can provide you that information. Below 1, the point pattern analysis does not include those. They are not included here. So let me go back to the PowerPoint. So we have covered the point data sets. We have shown you the corridor cluster LQ and also the area of interest cluster LQ, the way you can assess industry clusters. There are different ways to approach it. There will be exercises based on these two websites, and I will ask Andre to share some information on exercises.
All right, so I'm going to our main website. Oops. And so if you click again on training, you'll have this web page with tutorials and exercises. So video recording on this webinar will be available in the table. And exercise, right now, exercise 2 for the second webinar added already. And there will be third exercise. So we're asking you to complete second and third exercise by mid-June. And while completing these exercises, you're encouraged to use video tutorials and also right here, and also text tutorials that explain how to use tools that you will need for exercises. Also, next to each tutorial, there is a sandbox map that includes normally just one single tool for you to try, and less amount of layers, just one group of industry clusters layers, I think, for most of these tutorials, which makes it easier to navigate. So please complete those by the mid-June. So and of course we welcome your comments, any suggestions about exercises, tutorials, website, or our maps. What needs to be done, what you would like to see, and what problems you had when completing those exercises.
Thank you, Andre. And with this, we will be completing our this webinar, and we want to open the site for any questions. Any questions you can have, please ask. Means we will try to answer it now, or you have any thoughts, comments, ideas, they are most welcome. What we recommend is, if you have any idea for a tool or a specific way of a model builder tool you want to see, if you have ideas, please let us know. So any questions? What we will do is we will prepare exercises based on area of interest and corridor tool, and we will send those to you. There are specific video tutorials based on those tools, and what Andre has explained, the sandbox website, those are very helpful because they have less data. As you can see, there is so much information on industry cluster. So if you are welcome to use the original mapping website, but it will take you some time to become familiar with that and navigate it. So any questions, any thoughts, any comments, please let us know. And you are welcome to share your ideas by email later also. So we will wait for 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, with this then we will be finishing the webinar. So thank you for attending, thank you for giving us your time, and although Andre has said mid-June to return the exercise, there is nothing like a fixed date. Means we will be extending the date because we know that there will be 2 sets of exercises based on 2 previous webinar. So please take your time, and we will go slowly. But then with this webinar, we have completed the section on industry cluster. From next webinar onward, we will be focusing on occupation cluster. However, the websites will remain the same. Now we have a separate set of like another 4 or 5 different websites for different areas of regional planning, but we will be covering those in future webinar. With this, we thank you all for your time. Thank you very much.